Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and assemble the rudder. Going to assemble it using the pin hinges that we've used in the other components, and also we're going to be putting these control horns in. Now on these rudder ones, they were a little bit tricky to, after you cut the opening, they were kind of tricky to get to want to slide in there and push all the way through. So what I had to do was kind of use this. You could also use a small file, but I just kind of used this to end up digging out the wood on this side, and then both sides on the other side as well, just kind of freeing up the hole a little bit so that it had clearance to make that curve. So once you've done that, you should be able to do that without pushing too hard to where you feel like you're going to break the rudder, and it will eventually just slide through. I think that's going to be easier to do, put these on now, not necessarily even epoxy them yet, though we could do that, but at least have them through, so then we just have to epoxy them. And then once again, we're going to put Vaseline on the pin of each of these hinges to keep epoxy from hardening the pins. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay guys, so we're going to go ahead and apply the epoxy to the horns. We're going to slide it partially out on one side, apply some epoxy into that hole and around on the horn, and then slide it through, and then apply some epoxy to the opposite side, to the hole, and all over the horn, and then center it up. Go ahead and do that to the second one, clean it up, and let it dry. Make sure they're both perfectly centered with each other when you get them both in there, so these holes are going to line up. Okay, so as we were waiting for the horns to dry, I went ahead and installed the pins into the fuselage, and make sure that when you do that, you have these bent 90 degrees this way and not this way, as they're going to need to pivot side to side. Try and get them pretty accurately 90 degrees. And I once again put Vaseline on the pins before I did the plain side, and then after they were in, I cleaned off the epoxy and I put more Vaseline on. That's what you're seeing right now, is more Vaseline on the pins once again, and then we'll apply epoxy, slide on the rudder, and it'll be good to go. The only other thing you want to make sure is that you've cleaned these holes out enough. You might have to drill them out a little bit more so that these pins sink in about halfway into the fuselage and about halfway into the tail, so that you don't have a real wide gap when you end up sliding everything together. So get these straight, apply the epoxy, and slide the rudder on. Okay, so epoxy has now been applied. Starting at the bottom, working your way up, get just each one started, and then push firmly in, trying to get the space between the tail and fuselage even at the top as well as at the bottom. So make sure it's not tilted in each of the pieces like that, and make sure each of the pieces are parallel. Getting a nice close seam. And then, once again, using paper towels to wipe off the excess, and then paper towels with alcohol to clean it up perfectly. Okay, so we're finishing up the assembly of the cable pull system onto the rudder control horn. The bolt goes through, the ball link between the horns, and the nut at the bottom. Give it the final tightening down to where it's pretty snug, and that's it. Okay, so I've gone ahead and assembled the rudder servo arm onto the nylon horn that comes with the servos you're going to use, using the 4 screws as we did before. I've pre-drilled some pilot holes using the hand drill into the wood where the rudder servo is going to mount. And then the last step that we're going to do on this, we're going to screw in the servo, of course, and install the arm. But then the next thing is we're going to adjust this cable so that when the opposite end is held back right where the servo horn is going to be. So right now I'm holding the other ball link back onto the rudder horn, and I've adjusted it so that with a little bit of tension, each ball link is mounted right over the mounting point on the servo. Maybe this side. So, and these cables are going to crisscross. So on the left side here will be connected to the right side of the rudder. So I've adjusted it that the ball link on the servo arm here with a little bit of tension will align with the servo horn on the rudder. And there's some play because once you get it close, you can screw and unscrew this to make it a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. So as long as you have it pretty close to those holes, you'll be good for alignment. And then once you've got the distance right, you'll simply crimp the metal tube here. You can also go through one last time, kind of push this back through one last time just to create a very secure knot, if you will. Okay. You'll go ahead and crimp that and then cut the excess. So after you get this section crimped, you get the distance correct, go ahead and crimp this to keep the cable in place. And then once that's done, you'll be able to kind of line your ball link up with the servo arm and the servo horn. If it needs some fine adjustments, you can screw and unscrew using the threads to make final adjustments. And once again, you'll connect using your bolts going through, nuts underneath, tighten down, and you're done. Okay, so we've gone ahead and gotten the settings right so that when this is centered, the tail itself is pretty centered. And then after we've got everything lined up pretty well, and again, these crisscross, so the right side goes to the left rudder, the left side goes to the right rudder. The bolt to the ball joint to the nut. And then as long as there's a little bit of tension on there, you want it to be somewhat tight getting it onto the servo. Get it centered, push down, and that's it.